Hello from Washington. I'm Chris Stirewalt, and welcome to a very special edition of The Hill Sunday. Before we consider the elements of presidential greatness from the past, let's start by looking into the future. What are the things that could determine whether Donald Trump's second presidency makes history for its successes or its disappointments? And there's no one better to talk with about that than our friend and NewsNation colleague, Mick Mulvaney. He's the former chief of staff and budget boss in the first Trump administration and longtime congressman, smart mammal. Mick, you are often called on at this network as our resident Trumpologist, sorting out events as they happen, but I want you to give us a longer view today. In a piece you wrote for The Hill, you said Trump has always preferred a flat organizational structure anyway, with everybody reporting directly to him. All that will really matter in a second Trump administration is Trump himself. That's fair enough. But there is a kind of team of rivals thing happening here, too. But sort of unlike Lincoln, who surrounded himself with his own political rivals, the president-elect lets his subordinates fight it out amongst themselves, and then he picks the winners and losers. Is that about right?
That's exactly right. In fact, I've described it as sort of managing by conflict, managing by chaos. Trump loves to bring people into the room, people he considers to be smart people on a particular topic, and watch them sort of fight things out. The best example I can give you, Chris, is back in 2017-18, we must have had one meeting on trade and tariffs every single week, and you had a group of protectionists. You know, you had Bob Lighthizer from USTR, Peter Navarro from the White House team, and you had more free traders like Gary Cohn, and you would see those people sort of slug it out, and Trump saw himself as a mediator, moderator, and judge. Imagine back to his television days. So I fully expect that again. You will see a diversity of opinions in the building. Russ Vought, for example, at OMB, much more fiscally conservative than probably Trump himself. Michael Waltz and probably Marco Rubio, a little bit more neoconservative interventionist on foreign policy than Donald Trump is. So he'll get a variety of opinions. But yeah, it's not going to be a team of there'll be a lot of Democrats in the room, if that's your question.
During the campaign, the now president-elect said hiring, quote, bad, disloyal people was one of the biggest mistakes he made in his first administration. You said something similar, but in a different way. You said that he, quote, didn't hire very well. He did not have the experience of running government and didn't know how to put together a team that could work well with him. You alluded to it a little bit, but how's he doing this time around?
I think a lot better. I think the one of Trump's greatest strengths was also his greatest weakness back in 2017, 8 years ago, when we're right where we are right now, which is that he had nothing to do with Washington. He had no connections in Washington, strength and a weakness at the same time. And you saw that carry through in a lot of his cabinet picks. He picked a lot of people who had no Washington experience. Rex Tillerson comes to mind, for example. John Kelly, even though he's a general, never been in politics. In fact, the only two elected officials that I can think of from that first team were me and Mike Pence. Now I think he's going a little bit more heavily to people who have been exposed to Washington, D.C. You've seen a couple members of Congress, a couple of former members of Congress. Of course, J.D. Vance was also elected. So I think he's sort of getting the mix better this time around between inside and outside of Washington.
Okay, a lot of books have been written about the first Trump administration of varying quality, but one that I found useful and very interesting was At War with Ourselves by former National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster. Now, McMaster, a historian himself, doesn't paint Trump as a villain, but he does fault him for being mercurial, capricious, sort of all over the place. We still hear complaints from people in Trump's orbit that he's unwilling to hear bad news, very susceptible to flattery, and likely to be persuaded by the last person he talks to before making a decision. As chief of staff, you had the unenviable job of trying to play traffic cop in this kind of environment. What was the lesson you learned about what worked and what didn't work?
Yeah, that's probably a fair description. Here's what worked the best, I think, and this is just general advice for life, right? Which is, I think people are more willing to accept ideas when they believe them to be their own. You could not walk into the office of Donald Trump and say, Mr. President, you're wrong, we need to do it this way. By the way, you couldn't do that with Barack Obama or George Bush or anybody else. No, you don't do that to a president. What you have to do is figure out a way to sort of change the direction of the battleship. And what we did when we were trying to sort of get ideas to filter up in the White House was to, go to Trump's friends, go to folks on TV, go to folks on the Hill, and try to socialize the idea until he would say, you know what, let's do X, Y, and Z. And it was his idea. If Susie Wiles, the incoming chief of staff, is good at that, she's going to be very successful. I get the impression she will be, Chris. You have to imagine, with all the ups and downs that the campaign went through, and she ran the campaign, there were times where she had to figure out a way to sort of tell Donald Trump that things weren't going very well. And if she was able to do it on the campaign, she should be able to do it in the White House, and that's what a good chief of staff does.
Thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your television provider, and don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.